At the very highest level, when you're talking about site work and we're trying to get folks started in the transaction, and buyers come in, they already own a property, they're living in a house in Montgomery County or Arlington County or Vienna, and we start the process, we just give them a very high level number, right? It'll be in our paperwork, whatever it is, and as we start the transaction. So as for the buyers that already own property, we how do we go about like getting, what's the next level down from saying, okay, just budget X for site work, let's get to the next level of detail before we get to the site plan and all that. But how do we get to the next level?
Yeah. So what John's talking about is just when you come in and meet with us initially, we want to put some kind of round number in as a placeholder. That does not usurp or take the place of me going out to the site and coming up with an estimate. But at the next level down, I have to visit the site and get a visceral, again, understanding of the constraints, of the parameters to develop an estimate. At the next level down, there are things that we know and there are things that we don't. I'll just give two examples. If a lot has no trees, I think we could all say the tree removal cost will be zero. Right? I mean, that's not rocket science, right? But if we don't know what's underneath our feet, and so when you talk soils, we encourage our customers during our contingency phase to do a soil test. And why? Soils, what's below the ground, can affect design and can dramatically affect site cost. And it's even though we don't know it without doing some testing, it is a known commodity by spending just a very little bit of money, and the money you spend, way less than $1,000, is it's, first of all, it's your results, it's not ours. So, and even if you decided not to build and it was because of the soils, it will be the best X dollars, I promise you will ever spend in your entire lifetime.
So let me chat about that for a second. Yeah. So the first thing that happens is we invite you to come in and meet with us. You'll sit down with me and Michael, and we get you kind of started in the transaction. As you go through our process, for absolutely no charge whatsoever, at a certain point in our process, Michael will go out to your property and he's going to prepare the site cost estimate for free. So now we don't have a soils report at this point. So Michael's going to prepare the site cost estimate for you and go over it with you on the phone. And we're going to have, at this point, we're going to have a house price and we're going to have a site cost estimate. And if everything looks good and you want to continue, we do have it factored into our process to recommend that you actually get this soil study done. Because if you have bad soils, then we can budget some more money to remediate the bad soils. So if it turns out that they spend the money, and by the way, let me just say, I've heard from many, many, many buyers, they watch our videos and they come in and they say, I've already got the soil study done. And I say, how much did you pay? And they'll tell me. We will get the soil study done for you at Stanley Martin cost, which is always less than all the numbers I hear from the public when they come in and they've already...
Yeah. But having said that, John, if they already have the soil study done, we're going to use that soil study.
Exactly. So exactly. I'm just trying to... People watching this, they haven't contacted us. I don't want them to go waste the money on paying up for a soil study. So once we have the soil study and we learn more about the soils, what kind of things might you say to us? Let's say, what are bad soils? That's a pretty good question, I think.
Good question, John. So first of all, let me just kind of split soils into their soils and soil test for septic. That is not structural. This has to do with perk rates and so this has to do with your sewer system. That is a different animal than soil study for structure.
And it's two different engineers too.
Two different engineers. Well, the septic is really not an engineer per se. The soil is a structural sealed engineer. So what are the things we're looking for? One, presence of rock. And again, depending on where you build, some areas just don't have rock. So two, what's the soil bearing capacity to support the house? We want to know that. Three, we're going to generate dirt because prototypically the new house has a larger footprint than the existing. can we use the dirt that we generate to push back into what we call the overdig and backfill the house? So we want to know if we can use that dirt. And 3, we're looking for wet soils. And so there's 2 different types of wet soils. There is wet soils, what we call high water table. And just picture going to the beach with your children and you go in the sand, you dig down a couple inches and you hit the water table. I mean, that's pretty easy. There's also perched water tables. So now picture it rains, the water perks through the soil and it hits a really stiff or hard layer. Well, guess what? It isn't going vertical, it's going to go horizontal. So those are what we call high water table levels. And there's 2 things with that. 1, it affects the design. So why wouldn't you want to know that? We don't want to put a basement below the water table level. And 2, it affects the cost. And the cost can have a huge swing based on what needs to be done. That said, there are no soils that we can't build in. So for customers that perhaps are in Montgomery County near the river, those soils are marginal and sometimes what they call fatty clay. If you're in Alexandria, city of Alexandria, it's a lot of clay down there, and there's remedial steps we have to take, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to build the house. And we want to get all that uncovered before you ever remove your contingency and really start spending money.
Right. So from a bad soils perspective, let me try to just hit a couple things. Yeah. So if the engineer determines that the soil does not have the load bearing capabilities to support the weight of the house, what do you do?
So we undercut the soils. We put in a geotextile. We lift that we call subgrade with different aggregate, different stone, and then we put the house on it.
Right, and that'll cost X, whatever it is, but it's
going to be
significant.
Yeah, tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. So now another scenario that comes up occasionally is that there's a lot of clay in the soil and it's not suitable for backfill. So if that happens, how do you handle that?
So the soil's not able to be backfilled. Typically, we also have to undercut, just like the other example.
Get to that, yeah.
But what happens is now you're going to spend more money on dirt export, right? Because if you have dirt that's good, right, there's a plethora of building activities, and typically people that are getting rid of dirt have to pay for it because there's typically more of a need for people that need to get rid of dirt versus accepting dirt. But if you have bad dirt, you can't take it to a site because nobody wants it. You literally have to take it to the dump. So now you're paying trucking fee on top of a dump fee to get rid of poor soils.
And if you just brought up another great point, if your soils are good and suitable for backfill, there may be another job in the area that we can truck the dirt to, which would reduce your dirt export fee. Part of your site cost.
So, and I would say dirt is so let's say you have good dirt. Our first job, our first responsibility is to try to design the site to leave as much dirt on site as possible with the advice and consent of our customer. And then whatever's left over, we've got to get rid of. And some of this is a timing aspect, right? So if I'm on lot A and John is down the street on lot D and the distance is a half a mile, the trucking cost, one would anticipate to be exceptionally less than if John's 10 miles away. And so there's a timing aspect to the dirt import export process.
Exactly. And Michael was using me as an example of another builder.
Or
another job site.
That's all I meant to say.
So from a site cost perspective, that's a look at soils and from a geotechnical standpoint, right? And then we've got the soils from a septic standpoint, and I'm just going to sideline that for a second because I'm kind of focusing on the infill property now where we're tearing down a house. So no tap fees because they're already paid, right? And then we go through the process. You get the free estimate. Eventually, we'll do the soil study. Customer owns the soil study, so we'll learn all about their soils. And if they decide to go build with another builder, they own the soil study, right? And so what other, we've already talked a little bit about trees, right? Zero trees, zero.
So I would say,
right?
yeah. So in terms of two other factors, so I'm trying to cover things right now that are hidden,
Right.
but will be known, right?
Yes.
So soil's hidden, but easily known.
Very early in the process.
Oh, in the beginning.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
The next two things, if we're talking demolition, would be asbestos, right?
Right.
All the houses that we demolish have non-friable, it's a non-health risk, asbestos, right? It's in every house. I shouldn't say that. It's in 99.9% of the houses.
Because there will be one.
Right. And that can be vis-a-vis OSHA. That can be taken to a dump, can be gotten rid of. There's no health issue. If you have friable asbestos, that's the asbestos. When you touch it, it goes airborne. So now you're inhaling it. That's an OSHA no-no, right? So we have to abate that. And so during the process, typically we do this after the contingency is removed. We will have our third party go out and take samples from the house, send it to the lab, and verify if you have friable asbestos. Again, this is looking for what we call 2%ers, right? Overwhelming majority of the time, there's no friable asbestos.
Right.
We want to know, is there something else there?
Right. And it's the same with soils. 98% of the time soils are fine, but we just want to
Right.
want to know.
We want to know.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say are when we're reconnecting to utilities, the utilities from your property line to the new house, it's going to be new, right? We're going to have that in our site cost allowance. What we don't know, let's just take sewer. What is the condition of the sewer from your property line out to the sewer main, right? We don't want to just add that cost when it's not necessary. So when we disconnect the sewer and we disconnect the water, our plumber will take a TV camera and videotape what we call the lateral from your property line out to the main. If it's in good condition, reuse it. If it's not in good condition, better we know it now than hook into a sewer that's compromised and you have a problem.
Right. So this dovetails great into our process. So we have known and will be known.
Right.
So when you first come in and sit down with us in the conference room, we don't really know any of this, right? So we make some assumptions and we put together a estimate based on our knowledge of the area where you're building.
Right.
Then soil study, very easy to do. We'll do that very early in the process. So at one point, do some of these other things start to become known? Like when would you know if you had friable asbestos? When would you know if the sewer line from the property line to the street or to the main needs to be replaced?
Yeah. So the prototypical process is remove contingency. Many months later, a customer's going to move out of their house. Then our asbestos inspector goes in and damages the walls and blah, 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 and gathers the samples. Our plumber goes and takes his backhoe and digs down and disconnects. So that's typically several months after you remove contingency. Some customers, and we are in the 0.0005 percentile, they're so concerned that they want those unknowns known. It's going to cost more because of there's a timing aspect. The plumber's now got to come out
Twice.
on it, right?
Yep.
Twice. And so but most people will say, I understand it, right?
Right.
And they realize that if I need to, I will spend the money.
Right.
And
Right.
do the work.
And it's not a huge needle mover like the soil. The
Right.
soil is a huge needle mover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess we should needle mover. I would say on the potentially lower end, you're probably looking at about 40,000.
If you have bad soils.
And that's on the lower end.
Right.
If you have a bad sewer, and again, it depends what the height of the sewer main is, right? You're digging down 5 feet or you're digging down 15 feet.
Right.
Maybe 10K.
Right.
I mean, or 8,500, right? So
in
it
today's
really,
dollars,
it really just depends.
Right. So utilities, trees, and soil. So we've talked about that. High level infill property. We've got engineering, right? So that's part of it. So we budget money for that. So from a site work perspective, it's all the things that are not part of the house. So you have your house price, which is fixed. You have the site work, which is an allowance, which you're going to pay at cost. So these are the things we're talking about. So what else? Is there anything? So we've got maybe stormwater management that might be a factor in some jurisdictions that could be needle movers. When we say needle movers, meaning that if you have to put in a stormwater management device, it could really change your price, right?
Yeah. So there's certain jurisdictions that regardless if you meet certain criteria, you have to put in what's called a stormwater management facility. This is a direct consequence of the Chesapeake Bay Act, and they're trying to clean the phosphorus levels, right? At a high level, because there's so many jurisdictions we work in and it's so nuanced. I mean, I completely understand it, but I don't know if we want to get to every jurisdiction. Right.
Just high level.
So quite often it's based on what's the lot coverage. So what's the area of the land relative to the impervious terrain area. Then certain jurisdictions have different facilities. So some jurisdictions you can, I'm going to make it really basic, dig a hole, fill it with stone, and pipe the water, the stormwater to it, right? That's the roof runoff. That's pretty inexpensive.
Right.
Other jurisdictions, you've got to build these elaborate planters. You've got, there's all kinds.
Pervious paver driveways.
Pervious paver driveways. So there could be a huge swing in, it could be zero for sure. It could be 7,500. It could just as easily be 15,000.
Right.
So it really just depends on.
So going back down to the process,
Yeah.
at what point in the process do you start to discover that's when the site plan is developed?
No. So when I'm doing the site visit and I'm doing when I come back, I'm going to prepare this allowance. I'm doing the estimate analysis. Now, I'm not using the engineer's federal mandated worksheet. It takes, several hours. And it has to be done once you have a grading plan. But I'm looking at kind of high level numbers, impervious area, doing some comparisons and say, okay, do we not exceed the threshold where perhaps we don't need to put one in? In some areas we just have to, so I don't have to do any estimating. But I will put an allowance based on my deep understanding of the jurisdictional requirements.
Okay. So is there anything that we haven't chatted about with regard to site work on the so landscaping, engineering, utilities, soils, asbestos, potential sewer, stormwater management? Is there anything else that we should be talking about here on infill site work?
Well, I mean, there's, it depends on what a person's tolerance is to swings in numbers. So, for instance, sediment control. If I see we're building by a stream, there's a different type of sediment control mechanism, right? Because the county doesn't want you to pollute the stream. It's going to cost more money. I would know that. I would put some more money in.
Right.
Sometimes the jurisdiction says, yeah, what your thought process is good, but we want to make sure, even though water doesn't flow uphill, that you put this sediment control device on the uphill side.
Right. So that's a site cost.
It's a site cost.
Yeah.
It's illogical,
Right.
but doesn't mean logic is prevalent in all jurisdictions, right?
Right.
So sometimes I just don't know what I don't know because some things are crazy.
Right.
Some of the other things are, you're on a treed lot, right? And there's a difference between huge trees on a vacant lot in Poolesville or Loudoun County versus lots of trees on an infill in Bethesda or Fairfax or wherever, right? And so there's just different mechanisms to take down trees. And so I may look at a site and say, okay, well, I'm going to budget X, not having developed the plan, not knowing how much dirt we're going to fill in around the site, because what we know is in many jurisdictions, we have to have an arborist report. And as we know, we always want trees to live in perpetuity. I say that tongue in cheek, but the county certainly wants trees, and trees are a good thing. But if you dig into or fill dirt on top of what's called the tree's critical root zone, you'll harm the tree. And the survivability will be affected. Just because an arborist tells you that the tree isn't going to survive doesn't mean you can't save it. The county just won't give you what we call canopy credit because you need a certain amount of canopy. And so these are the nuances that can move needles. So we have customers say, oh, I love that tree. And I say, look, it's by the street. It's not landlocked. If you love the tree and it's got a fair chance of survivability, maybe try to save it, right? So there are these nuanced aspects that really, until we get all the engineers, until we're preparing the plan and customers can really understand grading and whatnot, you just aren't going to be able to uncover. And those, a needle mover here and a needle mover there and a needle mover there, all of a sudden you got 3 needle movers.
Right.
And conversely, a needle mover downward and a needle mover downward and a needle mover downward could go the other direction.
Right. But I would say more prototypically, we see some of the numbers come in on the higher side of your range and maybe some come in on the lower and
everything in between.
And everything in between. Right. Because you don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. Right. So the
and I would just say, John, and probably the other thing is, again, when we're dealing with smaller lots, we know we can't change the grading outside
on the perimeter.
Right. Just like we can't, without permission, take down a neighbor's tree.
Right.
And so depending on what we're doing with the grading, we may say, does it make sense to reduce the export, fill the yard? Now, granted, it has a dependency on the slope of the driveway. Should we do that? And what's the consequence of that? Oh, well, we need a wall. That's $1,000, but we're saving $3,500 in site. Our customer would probably say, let's do it. Right. Some of these discussions we cannot have until we develop a plan. A grading plan.
Right. And a grading plan would be developed at about 2 months after you remove
so when a customer removes their contingency, I would say it takes, in today's market, could take up to a month to get the survey, the analysis back for topography and whatnot.
Right.
And then a couple days or a week or two to get a preliminary grading plan. And then we would go through. So the customer's working directly with me.
Right.
And in some cases my team, and we're explaining the pros and the cons and the if and the thens, and there will be some iterations until we get to a plan. So I would say at about 60 days, and it depends how fast we can move through it, we have a plan that should be ready to submit to the county for permit. And at that time is when we start to distribute the plan to the trades.
To the contractors who will actually
provide
proposals on how. So at this point, we know exactly which trees are coming down.
Exactly.
So now we can send that to the tree contractor.
And which trees are going to be stump ground.
Right.
Which trees are in the envelope of the house that we have to take out a huge root ball. I mean, right.
So at this point, for the folks at home that haven't come in and met with us and they don't really understand our process completely. So Michael and I work on the front line with all of the folks that come into Stanley Martin throughout the sales process. So we go into a contingent contract and you're in this contingency phase while we are doing all this work for free. So once you're completely comfortable with Stanley Martin Custom Homes and you want to go forward with your transaction, you're going to remove your contingency. So when Michael says remove contingency, that's what he's talking about, because we don't, other than a soil study, we generally don't spend any of your money during the contingency process. We're not going to start developing the site plan until after you remove the contingency. Then it's going to take about 2 months before we have something that we can send out to the subcontractors to start getting real proposals. So for folks who want to really understand how much it's going to cost, you really just have to go through the process. There's really no other way.
No other way. But just one thing, for clarification purposes, when a customer signs a fully refundable contingent contract, we do not do a soil test unless the customer approves the cost.
Exactly.
So we are linked at the hip. There will be no fees spent without your approval.
Correct. Correct. That's very important. Yeah. So from a site cost perspective, I think one of the most challenging aspects of what I do every day is communicating with the folks that don't own a lot,
Right.
right? Or communicating with folks who have a lot under contract, and they come in and they go through our process, and they've got a budget. They've got a budget. Let's just say they have a budget of $1 million, right? For a talking point, and they've paid $200,000 for a lot, and they want to build a house that's X, and now site work. We're coming through this estimating period where you go out to the site. So one of the things, I'm just going to jump in and say, the difference between what we do at Stanley Martin Custom Homes from a site cost estimate perspective and what I understand most other builders do. Michael's actually the president of our company is actually going out to the site, preparing the estimate, and he's having a conversation with you about what he sees on the property, and he's going to start discussing all the specific nuances of your property with you at that point, versus some other builder that says just budget $85,000 for site or budget this for site, and they haven't been out to the property yet to see it. So we've got a really solid process to bring you through it. But going back to the folks that are trying to really understand this site cost number, when you go out to a property and you're developing a site cost estimate, and somebody's in feasibility study and they're literally trying to decide whether or not they're going to actually go forward and buy this property and build on it, or if the numbers don't work, they're going to walk away. What do you say to those folks when you develop your estimate?
Right.
And you have what kind of knowledge, and what are you basing your estimate on, and what does your conversation sound like?
Well, it gets back to with the soils. If the number, which could be high, is not palatable, or they think it's a deal breaker, better you walk from the deal. It's just not, life is too short, right? The other thing I would say is, overwhelming majority of time. So we're talking 98% of the time, we are, at or below our estimate. If in $1 million sale, a customer can't absorb $5,000 or $10,000 extra dollars, then that customer may want to second guess if this is a good decision for them.
This type of transaction, maybe even, right? Because this transaction does come with some risk, and it comes with a lot of reward.
Absolutely.
Right. So a lot of our buyers are going through this transaction because of the instant equity that they will realize most often in most of these transactions. But so going back to the folks that are in feasibility study, right? They've got a lot under contract. They've come in, they've met with us. We've given them some high-level numbers in the conference room. You've probably gone out and given them a site cost estimate, reviewed it with them. They've probably also, I would say 99% of our buyers that don't own the lot will have us do the soil study right away because they don't own the lot yet. And if the soils are bad, we want to find out. So we do have some clarity into that number.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But so what are the types of things, like, for example, we may or may not know about septic. What are the other types of, for the non-lot owners that are out there looking at vacant land, what are some of the conversations you have with folks about the things that you just don't know until you know?
Right. Well, let me just bring up one other thing that just happened yesterday. So I was with a customer, same exact scenario. They're under contract with us and on a piece of land, and there's overhead wires on a more rural road on the other side of the street. And I said, I am 99% sure there are no issues. But contact the utility, verify with an attorney, and make sure there is that you have access to power and you're not locked where you have no easement, where you have to get something from an adjacent parcel. So I try to also bring that to the table where I'm looking, what's the availability to get the utilities to the site? And just because something looks like it should be pretty evident doesn't mean necessarily it always is. 99.999% of the time it is. Yeah. But this just happened. This just happened yesterday. I mean, I would say for some of the other things that can occur is a customer wants to put their house 100 feet from the street, and then they decide to make it 200 feet. So 200 feet, theoretically, you've got 2 times 2x the driveway cost. You may have a little bit more in utility costs. So these are the things that, while they're somewhat quantifiable and they're logical, they can make the numbers drift. I'll give you another example. We had, so a lot of times we're building where there's concrete curb and gutter. Sometimes we're building where we call it an open ditch line. And 90% of the time we can use a standard we call culvert or pipe that lets the water flow underneath the apron. Sometimes, and depending on potentially issues in the area, we have to put in a larger pipe or a wider pipe. And so a pipe that may cost $1,500 could cost $3,500 or $4,000. And so some of these things until the engineering is developed, you don't know until the development of the plan.
It makes sense. So just to kind of recap process. So you come in, you're meeting with us, high level conversation on site. We get the conversation started. We can probably bring some knowledge to the table at that initial meeting with regard to site based on your property and where it's located.
Right.
Then you go into a contingent contract with us. Then Michael will go out to your property for free, no charge whatsoever. He puts his eyes on the ground and looks at all these things that may be factors in developing the property, and you get a order of magnitude site cost estimate.
Allowance, right.
Then you'll remove your contingency, and we will start to develop the site plan. Once the site plan is developed, we send the site plan out to the subcontractors, and they're going to give us back actual proposals. And at that point, we are going to begin to understand what the site cost is really going to be.
We will give you an actual number with actual cost behind it, predicated on the grading plan that we've developed. And at that time, two things can happen. One is that contingency. I think I covered this, that when I do the initial site visit, I'll put a little buffer in.
Eventually, for what if?
It's totally for what ifs. Yeah. That buffer, and remember, it's you're only going to spend what you approve. It's at cost, right? So that a buffer is eventually going to go to zero, right? But as we prepare the actual site costs, we'll start to reduce that buffer. And so let's say we budgeted on the high side. I don't know, you want to use 105 or 110 or whatever. And let's say it comes in at 100. What we tell customers, this is part of our process, to take that savings from the site bucket, and remember this house bucket, which everything in there is fixed. So again, it only goes up or down because you've added or taken away. And you may have a half a dozen of like-to-haves, right? So when the site is reconciled, you can move that money into your house bucket. What's the win-win? We make nothing on site. So for every dollar we can push down and squeeze out of the site is a dollar potentially, not all the time. A customer's going to move to the house. We make some money on the house. We make nothing on site. We are 100% aligned on getting that site work as low as possible.
So that brings up a really great point. So when folks have a budget and they're working their way through the process and they are wanting to add features to the house, and now as they're going through the process, they're learning more about what the actual site costs are going to be. At what point do they lose the ability to kind of push that site allowance over in the process? So just to kind of recap, so once you remove your contingency, it's really about 2 months later you have your site plan. So we're going to start getting hard proposals 2.5 months after that. Well, probably going to start building the house 4 or 5 months after they remove contingency. So there's this window, right? There's a window of a couple of months where proposals are coming in. The pencil's getting sharpened on the site cost, and the buyer has the ability to move some of that allowance over to features in the house.
Right. And what we tell our customers is features that are structural, 3-car garage, finished attic, things of that nature. We want to get into the transaction up front so that we can prepare the building plan to submit for permit, and so that we don't have to revise the building plan, cost money, revise the permit, cost money, and increase the timeline. Right. So we want to make sure the structural components are there. Right. And so we tell customers to focus on, oh, geez, I'd love to have this top. But I mean, this top is nice, but if I could get this top, those are the kind of the wish list items.
You're talking about countertops.
Yeah, countertops that we have. Sometimes a customer will vacillate on a lower level, right? They'll say, geez, if there's money, I'm going to finish the basement, right? It's not a structural change, but we do have to update the plan. We do have to update the permit. We can do that. It's a little cost, I don't know, maybe $1,000, right?
Right.
I'm just picking a number.
To make the changes,
To make
get
the
it back
change.
in.
But it
Yeah.
really won't, as long as we're not changing anything structurally, it's not going to
Right.
slow down the process,
Right,
but they
right.
will have a little bit of extra cost involved.
Right. Good.
So,
So just to kind of wrap up, I think another challenge that I experience just about every week is folks say, John, we want to go forward and we want to do this, and we're really nervous about this site cost allowance that we have here, and we're really hoping it's going to come in. I hear the word hope, and I don't know how to feel about the word hope. I don't know how to really process it, but I hear it literally everywhere. We're hoping that this site cost estimate comes in a lot less than what we have here, and
John, let me just stop you.
Yeah.
We also hope.
Right.
Because
that's true.
for every dollar we can save on site is a dollar we can push to the house.
Right.
At the end of the day, we do have customers that keep asking us, say, we can use whatever, I've already given you my thoughts.
Right.
If you want to eliminate the contingency, fine.
Right.
If you think, this other builder has given me X thousands for trees and I'm giving you Y, if you want to use the other builders, that's fine too. You're going to pay whatever it is, with the caveat that our costs are going to be lower than anybody else's. So I'm focused on the experience. Other builders are focused on, let's just get the sale and let it all kind of just shake out the way it shakes out.
So it's funny you say that too, because we actually just met with a buyer last week who told us that he had multiple friends go through the transaction with other builders, and all of them had their site costs come in higher than what the builder had estimated. And your approach is
try to come in high in the beginning and let it drift down.
Right, because that's a much better experience for the homeowner
and for my team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anything else you can think of that we should get in about site work? I think we covered it pretty well.
I think we're pretty good. I mean, there's other nuances with regard to, do you have a garage under that may have different costs related to coming in kind of at the first floor level. We can cover that at probably another discussion.
Yeah. So I think at the very highest level, you're working, when you come in and you work with us at Stanley Martin Custom Homes, you're working directly with Michael Schnitzer. He's the president of Stanley Martin Custom Homes. He used to be the chief operating officer of all of Stanley Martin companies. The institutional knowledge that he brings to the transaction is remarkable, and you get to experience it for absolutely free, which is amazing to me. And so if you want to learn more about our process, give us a call or click today, schedule your first appointment. You'll come in, you'll meet with me, you'll meet with Michael. We'll get the transaction started. And I can promise you that as we go through the sales phase and we get into your specific site, we're going to uncover all of these things that we spoke about today. And there could be other nuances that we didn't even bring up that could be specific to your property. But there's a lot of institutional knowledge coming to the transaction right here with Michael. So we look forward to meeting you soon.
Thank you.